Friends, welcome back. Apologies for that. Apostate Alex, what did you get me involved in? I just simply tried to run the 30-second video and the thing just kept feeding back and feeding back. But that video was awesome. Anyways, welcome back, friends. We have Mark Turi joining us for
Mhm.
interview number 4. And what we're going to be talking about today is he's going to take us through his adventures in well, let me show you what we covered in the first 3 interviews, and then I'm going to tell you where we're going to be picking it up from. So, he is an ex-Scientologist and specifically an ex-staff member, and we covered that in 3 different videos where we talked about, let's see here. So here's the channel. So we talked about under SPTV, Scientology podcast, interview number 1 was how can intelligent people be ensnared by Scientology stupidity? Interview number 2 was Scientology's influence in Hollywood. This one was amazing. And then we probably drove Teal Swan nuts with this one with Scientology, Teal Swan, Christian Science and Culture. So please check those out because we don't have time to go into Mark's whole story. We already covered that in detail. But where we're picking it up from is after he got out of Scientology, he then visited a bunch of different groups. And here is the list of groups that we're going to cover. And now, Mark, did you get sucked into any of these groups, anything like Scientology? Did you consider any of them cult-like, or did you just go in to sort of visit?
Mostly just visit. I mean, I spent some time at the first group on the list, the Unitarian Universalism. I actually did go to their, I think it's called the General Assembly, which they hold like annually. And in 2014, I went to Providence, Rhode Island, Boston, Maine, New Hampshire, because they had like a weekend conference, which was actually kind of really interesting and cool. But that was probably of all of these ones, that was the one that I spent sort of the most time in, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The other places were mostly just visits and, one-offs, here and there. And Hare Krishnas is a little different because they also have restaurants. So like that's how, and there was also, I mean, we'll get to it, but there was also an open
Mm-hmm.
house. So, that's probably the second most that I was involved in, but nothing as far as membership was concerned. It was mostly just trying to, I don't know, make peace with,
Yeah.
seeing if different groups were just as bad as Scientology and trying to make sense of everything. So, which helped, by the way, in some ways. But yeah,
Interesting.
not an official member of any of these groups.
Is that kind of why you went to seek all these things out, Mark? Because I haven't, Scientology was kind of my only life. I don't know any of these things
Yeah.
that we're going to be talking about, so I'm interested to hear your take on these. But did you feel like you were kind of trying to fill up an empty hole or something, or were you just curious at this stage in your life after
Pro-
leaving
Probably
Scientology?
both. I mean, yeah, both. I mean, we're going to get into where I lived in Santa Monica,
Hmm.
because within walking distance there was at least 2 or 3 of those centers. And then when I lived in Palms, I lived very close to one particular center. That's when I first moved to Los Angeles. For the first couple months, I lived in Palms, and then I spent most of my time
Hmm.
in Santa Monica and West LA. And so on Santa Monica Boulevard and 26th Street, and then later on around Bundy, Santa Monica and Bundy. So, and that's where I spent. Well, I was there for 2.5 years, so I only spent 2 months in Palms. The rest of the time was in the other places. So yeah, so it was basically, yeah, trying to make sense of things and
Hmm.
wondering if Scientology was a typical kind of experience or was it very interesting. Was it rare? Like what kind of experience was it? Because it was such a hard and strange and very
Yes.
toxic experience. I wanted to find out if other groups that were very LA based were the same, and in some cases, um, sort of like nothing's as
Hmm.
bad as Scientology, at least from my
Hey,
perspective.
Mark, if you don't
You
mind, I
know,
really want to hear the answer. That's the very ending question that
yeah,
I want to ask you at the very
yeah, no
end
worries, no worries.
because that
Okay,
damn it, you kind of blew the
yeah,
spoiler, but I didn't tell you we had a spoiler. But yeah, that's what I
sorry,
really want to
sorry,
know. No, no, dude, it's
I do
fine.
that.
But after we go through these things, I would like you to compare your experiences with these various groups and what you think are different and possibly similar with Scientology. Now, friends, just like
Yeah,
we do in the cult of Scientology, we always are good boys and girls and we look up all of our words. So we're going to be talking about new thought and new age movements in particular. And in order to do that, of course, we need to get a definition. So, Mark, first of all, would you consider these 6 groups that we're going to be talking about? Do they fall under the New Thought, New Age, or would you put any of them any other category possibly? before we define this?
So what I was, I'm just looking at the list, so I'm looking down, not to ignore.
No, it's fine.
But
No,
yeah,
please.
there are definitely some of them. Definitely, definitely some of them are part of that. So the Agape Spiritual Center is part of New Thought.
Real
And
quick, I want to
then
let people know, Mark, I want to
yeah.
let people know, sorry to interrupt, but the
Mhm.
Agape Spiritual Center is not to be confused with the Agape Lodge, which is an OTO Lodge of Curly. I just want to tell
Yeah,
people that. Yeah.
exactly. Yes. And I when I Googled it, that's what I found. And I was like, this is weird. They have the same name. Um, However, Eckankar definitely has New Age in it, and Hare Krishnas
Yep.
has some New Age stuff going on. So there's sprinklings of New Age, but the Agape Spiritual Center comes out of New Thought. Basically, they are
Okay.
a New Thought
Interesting.
movement group. So yeah.
Excellent. And what is a New Ager? So while New Age, or what's the difference between New Age and New Thought? So it says here, while New Agers incorporate channeling, crystals, and astrology in their spiritual practices, New Thought adherents follow a more divinely oriented approach to life. And to pull
Yeah.
up some other links here, where are we at here? Okay, so that kind of defines New Thought, and then the New Thought movement was based on the teachings of Phileas Quimby. I'm probably fucking that up. 1802 to 1866, an American mesmerist, very interesting, and healer. Quimby had developed a belief system that included the tenet, and where have we heard this before, Mark? I'm thinking Christian Science and Scientology right away, but I
Yeah,
know that, so
exactly.
it didn't originate with
Exactly.
them, right? Quimby
No.
had developed a belief system that included a tenet that illness originated in the mind as a consequence of
Hmm.
erroneous beliefs, and that a mind open to God's wisdom could overcome any illness. I mean,
It's
dude,
Christian
that's
Science.
straight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And we know what
It's
happened to.
both basically. Christian Science
Mhm.
was, I guess was it Mary Edie Baker, I think
Yeah,
was her name,
correct.
who's the founder.
Hmm.
So she wrote a book, like Bible and Health or Bible and Science anyway, I have it at, in Canada. Someone gave me a copy once. But it was
Oh,
very influenced by this. And yes, Scientology. I mean, Scientology was just picking stuff randomly from all kinds of things, and New
hmm.
Thought was definitely part of that. We talked last time
Definitely.
about postulates and how, like, in this group called the Soka Gakkai International, you can sort of
Hmm.
chant for and get stuff that's also has a New Thought context to it. But
Definitely.
it really is, yeah, it had been influential on Christian Science, Scientology,
Which is very interesting because until I
Soka
started, oh,
Gakkai, and
sorry, man.
other groups that actually spring out from New.
I feel like, did I lose you there? I think he froze up. Mark, can you hear me? Mark, you just froze up a little bit. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry guys. Yeah, I know internet kind of stinks. I apologize.
That's all right.
Um,
Guys, I
but
just want to let you know we're on a massive delay, so I'm not interrupting them, and we may have some internet issues. I finally
yeah,
have my
I'm sorry.
internet set up, but we're eternity away. So if he does, drop a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt,
I
Mark.
was
Please
just saying, like,
continue.
I was just saying too that, like, the Agape Spiritual Center, there are actually
Mm,
Christian churches that developed from New Thought, and when we get to that section of our talk, I'll get into more of that. So it's not just like a new religion; it's more
mhm.
like a form of Christianity, plus it's influenced other groups and so forth. So it's a little complicated, but it's 100% Scientology borrowed from it, Hubbard borrowed from it,
Definitely.
and on.
Which is really interesting, by the way, because when I started to study this stuff, and we're going to cover some of this today, you start to
Yeah.
get a bigger viewpoint that it didn't just originate with Hubbard. This stuff goes back to at
No.
least the 1800s. Now, check this out.
Oh God, yeah.
What are the beliefs in the New Thought movement? However, Eddie, and we already covered that Eddie person. I guess they aren't covered. They
That's
might be
Eddie
talking about,
Baker, Mary Eddie
yeah,
Baker.
there you go. However, what Eddie shared with the New Thought movement was a belief that, here we go again, was curing illness, was connected to the
Yeah.
mind's power to restore health. By the
Yeah.
1890s, the New Thought movement had shifted attention away from curing disease because it didn't work. Instead, it focused
Yeah.
upon the mind's power to create material success. And isn't that funny, Mark?
Yes.
Because almost all these movements are based on freaking narcissism. How can I get more money? How can I get more jobs? When I look back at Scientology, it was pure narcissistic spiritual bypass. It had
Oh,
nothing to do with meeting the creator or any kind of spirituality, whatever you want to call it. It's all about how can we
no.
fucking make money to pay for the bridge, right?
Yeah.
Oh
And
my
that
god.
whole thing about mind over matter is very,
Hmm.
very popular in New Thought. So they focus on trying to be positive and having faith, and then good things will come to you. And again, we'll go into more of that through Agape Spiritual Center. But that's the law of attraction, The Secret, that kind
There
of
you go.
stuff, How to Think and Grow Rich. All of those books and movements stem from New Thought,
Clearly,
basically.
Alex is still an indie Scientologist and is stuck on Scientology because he wants us to. And this is what my dad said to me one day when I was asking him to borrow $5 because I was like homeless and starving on Hollywood Boulevard. Come on, guys, expand your anchor points and use your OT powers to combat these internet issues. Listen, Alex, you're the one that created this fucking problem because you sent over this kick-ass intro. By the way, that was an intro that he threw together last night, guys. It was awesome. And I tried to be tricky and get that to run at the beginning, but it kept feeding back. And since I don't take responsibility since I left Scientology, I'm putting all blame on Alex. But thanks for creating that intro, bro. That's fucking awesome. And I'll figure out how to use it next time. And at the end, please stick around, guys, because Apostate Alex has something going on at noon, followed by 5 p.m. with Poe, who's interviewing Nasty Nathaniel, to be discussed at the end. So let's start off with I guess we'll kind of go in order, Mark, from when you're out of
Sure.
Scientology, you have a
Yes.
black hole in your heart, and you're
Mhm.
basically kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but trying to fill that spiritual hole. But the only one I want to do out of sequence is Eckankar, because that is the one I think, as you're going to tell us, is the most similar to Scientology, right? In fact, isn't it a splinter group of Scientology?
Kind of.
Mhm.
So Eckankar was founded in 1965 by a guy named Paul Twitchell. And Paul
Great
Twitchell
name.
definitely was probably a Scientologist. He might have known Hubbard. I'm not exactly sure, one of those two things, but he was a Scientologist, so he did Scientology. Um, Eckankar is very different from Scientology for a number of reasons, although they do have overlaps. So the first thing is they actually do have a professed belief in God, which they define as like an energy. It's kind of like the way the Tao is in Taoism, or some like Deepak Chopra stuff, where like energy of the universe and matter is God and stuff like this. It's usually called pantheism. So they do believe that. They also chant and they do meditation, which you can't do in Scientology. Those are mixing
True.
practices.
True.
Um, and what they believe is when they chant, for example, they chant the sound Hu, which is spelled Hu, pronounced
Mhm.
Hugh, and they chant it in a specific way. And they believe that that in and of itself is like the eternal vibration of the universe. So they're connecting to some kind of higher spiritual thing. Um, and yeah, there we go. The hue is the sound of the soul, and universal vibration, and it's
Can
a
I just
sacred
read one
name
of
of
these
yeah.
real quick, Mark,
Go
just to
right
give
ahead.
the
Go right ahead.
audience a flavor,
Hue,
and then I'll
yeah,
throw it
hue.
right back to you. They got to hear this. The sound of the sound of soul, a divine sound courses through all life, through every blade of grass, every galaxy, every atom of our bodies. Hue is an ancient, sacred name for God, a carrier of love between soul and God. When sung or chanted with an open heart, it opens the lines of communication. Again, I'm getting restimulated from Scientology, Mark, to the most
Yeah,
sacred part of yourself. Oh, really? Do tell more. Hue acts as a tuning fork, aligning soul with higher states of love, creativity, healing, and awareness. It is the clear voice of God. I would run at sentence one here, but I'm going to force myself to keep going. With the power to transform the lead of human consciousness into the gold of an enlightened soul. Okay.
right.
That
So
sounds,
basically,
yeah. Wow.
yeah, very new agey, very
Mhm.
quantum physics type peoples. I think that's the current leader. His name is Harold Klemp,
This guy right
and
here.
yes, the white gentleman. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a big temple in Wisconsin, although it might be Minnesota. Someone can tell me. It's up there in the Midwest, and they do all kinds of stuff. So I only went once to a particular place. The only one time I went was there used to be, I don't know if it was a branch of a center or something like this in Palms when I was living there. The first couple of months that I moved to Los Angeles in like very early 2009, I lived in Palms, and there was a center again, like you know a 20-minute walk from where I lived. So I went there once. They do believe, for example, in past lives. They believe that like when you go to an event, I guess, or whatever they want to call it, like a service, um, you chant, and then they're very into dreams. So they ask people to like log their dreams if you're going to do that. Like if you're going to actually do Eckankar, you kind of have to try to remember your dreams, because your dreams have interpretations to to the soul and your
Interesting.
past lives. They do soul travel. They do believe that you can exteriorize. That's a Scientology term.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of that like overlap between Scientology, but I would say that it definitely cranks it up to 11 when it comes to the New Age kind of stuff. It's probably more New Agey than Scientology, because Scientology puts in a lot of different things
Mhm.
that isn't necessarily New Age, and I think it's more New Thought in Scientology than New Age. But
Mhm.
Eckankar certainly turns it up. What I will say is, when you were reading that and you were talking about it's an ancient name, much like Scientology, much like Mormonism, there's a sort of, I guess you could call it pseudo history or alternative history in the Eckankar religion, because they believe that there have been many Ek masters throughout the ages who have taught Eckankar. So Eckankar is not a modern thing that Paul Twitchell started. It's an ancient thing that
Mhm.
had been lost, and Paul Twitchell kind of refound it, and now this guy Sri Harold Klemp is continuing it. And what's really interesting is, if you compare it to other different religions, I mean, who knows, right? So I don't know,
Mhm.
for example, I'm Jewish, but I don't know if there was a historical Abraham or Moses. To me, at this point, whether they were real or not, it kind of matters, it kind of doesn't, but it's still, was there a historical Jesus? Okay, it's still debatable. But they would say that these Ek masters like lived at different times, and of course, there's no evidence of that. So the idea being that they're an ancient tradition, okay, it's a modern tradition, but at the same time, they delve in a little bit of alternative history. They have some really cool names for their act masters. I've kind of forgotten which ones exactly they are. You can Google all that kind of stuff and look at it. But it is kind of interesting from that perspective, where, like Scientology with Xenu and going back
Mhm.
to when volcanoes that weren't there 70, 60, it's kind of like that. So they go back to validate their modern belief system, and that's very much, again, a kind of a pseudo history, alternative history type thing, which I kind of like. I like reading novels about alternative history. It's kind of interesting, what if.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a really great series of books that also was an HBO miniseries that was called The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. And it's incredible because it's basically like, what happens if the America in World War II joined the Germans and were Nazis. Of course, didn't happen, but that's the whole point. So I would say like Eckankar is definitely a very imaginative, very creative, and they do a lot of these new agey kind of things. So whether or not it's like heinous and evil and occult, like again, I just had one brief experience. It reminded me again a lot about Scientology. My flags went off, and then I just didn't
Mhm.
return. But I probably still have books somewhere on a bookshelf, somewhere from them. So good and bad goes with everything. So yeah, that was basically me walking to a center and then being there for an hour or two and then coming back.
Where was the center at, by the way?
So I was living at National in Sepulveda, where there's like this big Vons there, and I walked on, I think it was Barrington and National. So I think that's considered Mar Vista, because Sentinel is where the border is, between the west side and the like east side or whatever. So that's where it was. I don't think it's there anymore, because I've previously, when I go to Los Angeles, sometimes I like to drive around my old neighborhoods. And the last time I was in LA was 2019, and I was actually driving around my old neighborhood, and I wanted to see if the Eckankar Center was still at that place, and it wasn't there. So where they are now, I don't know. But however, there is a Hollywood Center, and I think it's on Sunset or Santa Monica Boulevard or Hollywood Boulevard. So one of those, the three big boulevards. But there is a place in Hollywood, which is like the Hollywood Eckankar Temple or Center or whatever.
Temple.
Um,
Jesus.
just driving by, I saw it. But yeah, it's again, it's in Toronto. I know I had a friend that had a friend who was at the Eckankar in Toronto. I had an ex-neighbor from 15 years ago that was into Eckankar. They don't proselytize, so they don't
How do
go
they
out
get
and
members? How do they get members?
I guess people who are achists, they try to share a little bit of their faith or whatever, and if someone says
Mhm.
like, "Oh, hey, what are you into?" They'll say it, but they don't really like go out on do missionary stuff. They don't disseminate. I think they just try to set good examples, and then if people are interested, they come to a service and then they do their activities, and then they become members after that. So it's probably like Scientology, where it's not that difficult to like become a member. Anyone can pretty much become it. There's probably more seekers than there are members, but they also claim around 50,000 members worldwide. So
It's more
there's
than
probably more
Scientology.
Eckists. Yeah, there's more Eckists than Scientologists. So the guy that did
That's crazy.
Scientology and then
He
did his
was an
own thing is very
ex-Scientologist, wasn't he?
successful. I'm
Wasn't he an
sure he was. Yeah,
ex-Scientologist?
Paul Twitchell. I'm
I'm
almost
quite
100%
sure.
sure he was an ex. Yeah, and he might have known Hubbard as well. But basically, he's doing better. He's doing
Yeah,
better member wise. He
that's
might
pretty
have double the
impressive.
members than Scientology. But yeah, and
That's
there's centers all over the place. I know there's one in Toronto, there's a couple in Los Angeles, and there's big temple in the Midwest. I want to say it's either Minnesota or Wisconsin. I think it's in Minnesota, but regardless, and they have like seminars, and they have retreats, and they have all this kind of thing there. So, and I've not been to that temple center, but from people who when I met in Los Angeles, they had come back, or they had been to that temple, and then they were telling me, and then of course my ex neighbor, um, I just found a letter, because a letter had come to our house. Was my old next door neighbor, so a letter had come to my house from Eckankar addressed to my neighbor. So I went over and I said, "Oh, what's Eckankar?" He was like, "Oh, let me tell you," and
oh god.
whatever. I
Yep.
maybe talked to him for about 20 minutes. I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." That was before Scientology, mind you, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
still
I
after
didn't know that.
Scientology, just this brief one-off thing. I didn't really feel like logging my dreams and stuff like this, and then they said past lives, and I got triggered, of course. So
Yeah.
that was my experience.
After the Scientology experience, did you immediately recognize the red flags in Eckankar?
Well, again, I don't know if it's as bad as
Mhm.
Scientology, because I wasn't a member, but definitely like it was definitely more eccentric and unorthodox, and like Scientology was. And I think sometimes when you leave a group like Scientology, initially you become very, very overly sensitive to different things. And so if something even reminds you just a little bit about Scientology, if they just use similar phrases, or they just
Mhm.
use similar language, or that you get a feeling, then you just hit the road. So that's basically what happened to me. I was like, I got really, really nervous, and then I just hit the road. But it wasn't for me anyway, because I didn't want to do half the things they told me I should be doing, which is again logging dreams and chanting and this kind of stuff. It just wasn't for me. So, but in addition to that, yeah, there were a couple of things like certainty, that this ancient faith, this alternative history. There was just too many things that were lining up to me that reminded me of Scientology at that time. So, and then I just thought, forget it. And just didn't pursue it.
All right, now what about this one? Again, I
Yeah,
wanna remind people that this is not to be confused with the, Agape, Crowley's OTO Lodge. What
that's
is
right.
this thing, man? And another thing is all these that we're talking about are in LA, right, Marcus? I mean,
That's right. Yeah,
Mark, I had Marcus on yesterday, sorry about that.
no
Yeah, they're
worries.
all that's what's amazing about LA. You can come here and it like has every cult and every kind of like mind control program you could possibly want to get into. They don't have much of a web page here, do they? Should we watch a little bit of
No,
what this guy says
if you want,
first?
go ahead.
Let's
Hopefully
see
not.
what.
They won't get copy strike though.
Oh, that's a great, yeah. And since they're a
Yeah,
cult,
they might.
or
You
I'm
might get.
sorry, I
You
don't even know
might.
if they're a cult. Let's not go.
Yeah.
Let's. I don't want to push my luck. Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
So basically, that gentleman is
Mhm.
his name is Dr. Michael Beckwith,
Mm.
and he's been on like Oprah. Like he's one of Oprah's gurus. So that should tell
He
you,
he
it's
looks like an
basically a lot
Oprah
of.
guru, man. Yeah, that
He
says a
is, yeah,
lot.
like Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil, and what's that
Mm.
guy's name? Uh, Dr. Andrew Wheel or Weil or whatever, who's also kind of and Dr.
Uh,
Oz, and yeah,
Doctor.
and Deepak Chopra. Like this is kind of
Yeah,
the group
yeah.
of like, this is definitely this is a new thought group, but definitely they're adjacent to some of the new agey stuff. So basically,
Mo-
like the Agape Spiritual Center is a new thought group, and you can see here they learn yoga, meditation. I don't think it's considered Christian, but they definitely come from that type of, well, there's Ellen, okay, so he was on the Ellen show. They come from that tradition of New Thought. And again, really, I remember actually watching him shortly before I went to Los Angeles. He was on Oprah. And I remember they were trying to give like advice to people that were going through hard times. And Michael Beckwith, his advice was like, just have faith and just, be positive and whatever. And it's like, well, that stuff doesn't really, give us food or anything. Like, you know what I mean? It wasn't like real practical advice, but that's the type of advice that people in that movement would give. Like, just don't give up and be positive and things will come your way if you da da da, right? Um, it's just kind of weird, but I just went once. It was in Culver City at the time. Now they're in Beverly Hills. But when they were in Culver City, I just went down because I was like, "Oh yeah, remember this place? Maybe it'll be interesting." And I went for the Sunday service or whatever it was. I used to take the bus in Los Angeles, so I remember it took a long time. But I took like 3 buses to get there from Santa Monica, and it was a little wooish. It was a little bit like magical thinking type stuff, and I don't remember them making any references to like Jesus or anything, but there was kind of that part there. They do talk about the Bible a little bit, so it was a little bit more Christian centered, but also kind of New Age, kind of New Thought. And he's written a lot of books, Dr. Michael Beckwith. A lot of it you can find in stuff like Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra. Like it's the similar kind of New Age, esoteric, positive
Mark,
thinking type thing.
I
Very
have
LA.
so many. Sorry to interrupt. I told you guys we're on a delay. That's no excuse. That's like Aaron constantly saying I was in a cult. That only works so many times. But we are on a delay, I promise. That reminds me of oh fuck, I just lost my train of thought. What did you just say, man? It'll trigger what I was just gonna say.
Well, I was just saying it's very Los Angeles, and it's very like just be positive and think
That's not
mind over matter stuff. Like, yeah, I don't know.
that's not working, man. You didn't re-stimulate it. Just kidding.
I apologize.
That's all right.
I
Um,
apologize for everything. But
oh,
no,
this is what I wanted to
it's
say. I
yeah,
got it. Guys, if you know any of these, if you yourself have been a member of any of these groups, or you have anything
yeah,
that clicks to mind when he's talking about the New Age and the New Thought or anything at all, please put it in the comments. Like to engage the community and make it a mutual conversation, because a lot of people in the that follow this have had experiences with groups like this, and
yeah,
it's just like, and it's also remarkable how similar they all are too.
yeah.
You're a
They
spiritual
can be,
being.
especially with Scientology. Yeah,
Yeah, so Scientology is like nothing, original at all.
no,
And also anybody, this is what I was going to say, Mark. You probably just pissed off a bunch of people, because I know I have several friends, especially here in LA, that are into Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra, or however you pronounce that
yeah,
guy's name. And yeah, man, I mean, it's just like, bro,
yeah,
when I see Eckhart Tolle, first of all, he's on Oprah. So anybody on Oprah, I'm
yeah,
like, is not somebody I'm going to follow. That's just my bullshit detector. But I think his
yeah,
whole story was like he was sitting on a bench and he just looks like meditating one day. And then all of a
hmm,
sudden the answer is like, this is what happens to every guru, right? Whether it's an acid trip, they're sitting on a bench, or they're, jerking off. They always get the download from God somehow. And then they come out to the public and say, God has spoken to me. And I just
yes,
look at Eckhart Tolle for 5 seconds and I see him. It looks like he's like hypnotizing people or whatever. Well, what I ask myself,
mhm,
Mark, is this guy that I'm looking at an example of what I would want to be, how I would
right,
want to speak? In other words, is this somebody I'd not want to copy or emulate, but is this somebody I would want to be like in a certain way? And when I look at
yeah,
him and the way he talks and it looks like he's kind of putting people into a trance. I immediately
yeah,
go, that's not something I would aspire to. I should have been able to take one look at Hubbard's teeth, the way he was talking and his demeanor and his health and everything, and said,
I
this is
know,
not a guy I want to follow. But you know how it is, Mark. Once you're in, though, the cognitive dissonance
yes,
kicks in, the trance state goes in, your critical thinking gets shut down. And for when I was in Scientology, Hubbard looked like a kind of a beautiful, not beautiful man, but he only looked ugly when I got out. In fact, I would
That's right.
go, Mark, I would hold up a picture or watch him on video or whatever every, few months. And the uglier he
Yeah.
got to me, the more I realized I was deprogramming, because I would literally was under such a spell that even the guru himself, even Hubbard, I couldn't see his bad health. I somehow
Mhm,
blanked out.
mhm.
You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I do. Yeah, I mean, for me, I listened to tons and tons of lectures. I never really saw too much of Hubbard on video, but even his lectures, like well, I listened to all of the
Yes, I did.
lectures from the Hubbard Dynex seminar, Hubbard Dynex auditor course, and then when I was in St. Hill in December of 2005, I was reg to buy, and I didn't want to buy it. Was the first Congress, which is called the Anatomy of the Spirit of Man, and that
Right.
was like 15 lectures. Is all garbage. He just his the way that he was talking is also very hypnotic, because by the time I put it in and I'd be listening to him, and I'm not listening, and then like an hour is over and I'd be like, what the fuck is going on? It was weird. Anyway, um it's just very strange. I don't know. But I hear you. I mean, anyone like that. Plus, Eckhart Tolle, I think he's from Vancouver, and Vancouver is like
Mm.
hippy dippy. It's like
Is it? I didn't know
Portland.
that. Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't know it's like Portland. Really?
Vancouver is super. Yeah, Vancouver is super duper
I didn't know
hippie,
that.
hipster. Yeah, like a lot like Portland. Probably with a bit of a seedier side. Stanley Park is pretty bad, but yeah, yeah, hippie places where all the hippie Canadians go because the weather's slightly better than it is everywhere else. Still sucks. So the weather in Vancouver's a lot like Seattle, but is better than Toronto and Montreal, and you can be a hippie. So that's where he's from.
Well,
So
shit,
yeah.
that would have been the group I would have fallen into then if I was born there, because yeah,
Oh
I
gosh.
wasn't obviously a hippie because I wasn't born during that time, but I can identify with
Yeah,
hippies.
but a lot of this stuff, like, yeah, and with Agape, so Agape as well. Just
Mhm.
to close out Agape, so
Sure.
there's also a group. There's also another group that's called the Unity Church, and
Hmm.
the Unity Church has a couple of famous members, like Oprah. Oprah's a member of the Unity Church.
Really?
So,
Wait,
yeah, so is
Mark,
Maya.
real quick. Sorry to
Mhm.
interrupt, but could you tell people what is the Unity Church?
Unity Church is a New Thought group that is also a Christian church. So they
Oh,
have like their
it's.
beliefs are more Christian centric, but they
Mhm.
add in a lot of the New Thought stuff. So like Dr. Michael Beckwith, I don't think Agape is part of the Unity Church, but I know that they're very close, they're very similar. And so again, it goes back to they have prayer, they have all this kind of thing, but they focus on that, like, positive thinking and all this kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
God will reward you if you have positive thinkings, and so forth. It's a little bit of a simplistic way of saying it, because there's a lot more to it, but it's more Christian centered than other New Thought groups might be more non-denominational or most spiritual in an ambiguous way, whereas the Unity Church is Christian plus it's New Thought. And so, yeah, Oprah is a member. So is Maya Angelou, who also was always on Oprah when she was alive. Betty White was a member, as was Della Reese, who was on Seventh Heaven, and then Barbara Billingsley, the old actor. So they did go through a time when a lot of people were joining the Unity Church, back in the 50s, 60s, and so forth. So it was actually quite the thing to do in LA for like the middle of the 20th century. And a lot of older actors got into it and stuff like that.
Interesting, and that a lot of actors and artists are attracted to these kind of cults, these new age
Yeah,
cults. In the 60s, it
yeah,
was
the
the same
positive
thing.
and
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, what's
50s
not to
Christian
like about it? It's
Science.
positive. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Christian
Mark,
Science was big, yeah, in the 50s among Hollywood, and
that's right.
so yeah,
That's
so this
right.
was just
And
one of
it
the
is still.
different flavors.
I know,
Yeah,
but it's amazing how similar they all are. When you were talking
yeah.
about Oprah and the Unity Church, you weren't talking about the Unitarian Universalists, which we're going to talk
No, no,
about,
no.
were you?
That's a
Okay.
different
We'll
one. Yeah.
save
Well,
we'll save that one.
they're
We're going to save
they
that
are
one
they
for
are
last,
different
because
organizations. Yeah.
that's the one you have the most
But
experience with.
also interestingly too, if I always like to talk about famous members. The Agape Spiritual Center. Two of the actors from Married with Children, Christina Applegate and David
Mhm.
Faustino, used to go there. So they were heavily
Really?
active in that church for years. I don't know if they still are, but they both got into it. Christine Applegate, I remember watching like an interview, and I just
I can't
looked for
see
it
her
as
involved
to
in that.
prepare to prepare for this. I went back to look for this interview, and she said, yeah, they called it the Agape Spiritual Center. Then she brought in David Faustino, and he found his wife. I don't know if they're still married, but that happened, and that was maybe 20 years ago. And then it says too that they've reached New Thought books and so forth have reached between
Mhm.
2 to 6 million people. So they
Oh my
don't have
God.
actual member statistics, but 2 to 6 million people. And the one last thing is that if
Mhm.
anyone wants to read a book, one of the most influential books from 1926 is called, and this will remind you of Scientology, The
Mhm.
Science of Mind by a guy named Ernest Holmes. And that's widely available. You can get it
Wow.
on Audible, you can get it on Amazon. That's like a pretty big new thought text that sort of combines everything, and you can kind of get into the headspace. And I have read that book, and it's just not for me. But
On a scale of
yeah,
0
so
to on a scale of Dianetics to 10, how was it?
well, Dianetics is probably pretty low. A little higher. I don't know. Let's put Dianetics at a 1. Then this would be maybe like a 3. I mean, it was
'Cause
kind of interesting. It's a good piece of Americana at that time. Like that's how I like to put into context. Like, okay, this stuff for me, it's not literally true because I have my own faith, but that's okay. Um, will it tell me something about the time that it was written in? And it did. And it was
Mhm.
really interesting for going back to like a lot of Christian Science, and a lot of this positive mental attitude stuff goes back to a time when medicine was brutal. And there was also a lot of snake oil salesmen. And so people, they didn't want to literally risk dying in a hospital because they didn't know how to boil their instruments if they got a surgery, but people didn't know germ theory at a certain time. So the whole mindset was like, well, if we can avoid going to these butchers, which in some cases that was the case up until, like antibiotics and penicillin and whatever was invented, which was around the 20s ish. It's like you kind of get this idea of like it was just easier to pray. Of course, that doesn't do anything necessarily, but like it was much better than going to get surgery and then dying in the surgery, because any
Yeah.
complex surgery 100 years ago was incredibly risky. Today, it's obsolete because of all the great miracles of modern science and medicine. But back then, I mean, you probably remember learning in the Civil War, this was before they sterilized their
Mhm.
instruments. And so a hell of a lot of people in the American Civil War didn't just die from gunfire, they died from staph infections and bacterial infections and gangrene and all this kind of stuff because they didn't know germ theory. So it's
Mhm.
like you can put yourself back in that place and be like, well, what would I rather do? And in some cases, just being positive was better than drinking snake oil or going to a surgery that you were most likely going to die in. And that's
Yeah.
just that's a historical perspective. Today we can look back on that and say, if what we know today was back then it's obsolete now. But you got to kind of put yourself in their own headspace. And I try to do that as a historian. You try to think like the people in the past, which is not 100%, but it's something that I try to do. And so when I was reading Science of Mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm an American in the 1926, and what's medicine like, and what's being sold, and what do we know, and and then you could kind of read through it and be like, okay, if I lived back then, maybe this would make sense. So that's kind of how I like to, look at things in a non-literal way, but trying to think like, the writers would have thought back then.
Speaking of non-literal way, someone, I think it was
Yeah.
Angela, brought up that she just learned, she got all she knew from Joseph Campbell. Have you read The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell?
No, I've
No?
not.
Are you
No.
familiar with it?
I know it because George Lucas wrote Star Wars basically based on it,
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
was very popular in the 70s. But other than that, like the Luke Skywalker story is basically the hero's journey. But
Hmm.
I've never gone into that. Joseph Campbell, no.
I
Although I
like
know,
that,
again, he
Angela.
was big in the 70s.
Yeah, yeah. I like that,
But
Angela.
yeah,
The hero's journey. I felt like I was kind of going on a
yeah,
version of that. That was a good metaphor to use. Waking up out of Scientology.
yeah.
And the reason I brought that up is because that one other cult, or maybe I should just call them a group, because I don't know if they're a destructive cult or not. But I think it was Eckankar that we brought up, right? Where it talked
Mhm.
about the spiritual, Joseph Campbell's, hero's journey or whatever. Let me see if I can actually pull that one back up, man, because this one read at us something where, what a lot of these new age cults do is they take people like, Joseph Campbell, and they turn them into these new age face, and they kind of water them down and make them a paint by numbers and kind of basically really silly. Let's see if I
Yeah.
can share Eckankar here. Just listen to this. I mean, this is straight out of like something that you would hear from, an L. Ron Hubbard lecture or
Yeah.
bulletin or something. Your soul, and this might be true, right? So they take something that you're like, you either, what are the options, Mark? You can believe in, a God that's full of hellfire and brimstone that's going to kick your ass if you don't live a proper life, or you can believe in
Mhm.
science. I am a body. This is all there is, and when I die, God damn it, it's all over. So those are kind of your options, and then something like this comes along and it says, your soul, an eternal creative being, unlimited, divine. Does something inside you long to know life's purpose, to make sense of
Mhm.
the world around you? And then also, if you add a lot of deep bass like this and you do a really cool, slick video like Scientology
Mhm.
does, where it has no message, it's all just empty, but it just sounds cool and it's well produced. And then you add lines in like this, you're going to capture
Yeah.
X amount of people. Eckankar is an active, individual, creative spiritual practice, a companion and roadmap for your journey home, kind of like the bridge to total freedom, to the heights of
Yep.
self discovery and God discovery and beyond. Come along and discover the most secret part of yourself. This sounds like a video game or something, like this could be a web page for like a video game, but this is like real. Here we go. The hero's
Yeah.
journey, right? Here
That's
they
right.
rip off Joseph
Yeah.
Campbell, advanced spiritual living. I mean, if spiritual living isn't enough, you can go, here we go with the advanced choruses, right? Have you
Right.
ever felt a hunger? Have you ever felt a hunger for something you can't even put words to? I mean, everybody's going to answer yes to that. This is how this works, guys. I think you're depressed, or you went through some breakup, or you're just
Mhm.
dicking around on the internet and not feeling good, and then something's missing. Again, right place, right time. As me and Marcus talked on the previous interview, um, you don't need to, not you, Mark, but me and Marcus talked about, you don't need to be in
Mhm.
an abusive relationship or have a shitty upbringing to fall for this shit. So let's say you're
Yeah.
down and out and you just stumble across this. Have you ever felt a hunger for something you can't even put words to? Yes. What if you're actually on a journey, a quest that has spanned the ages, continents, lifetimes? It has survived victories, tragedies, wealth, and power. This is so retarded. Unimaginable gains and losses. Yet this is the garbage that we were believing in, bro. This could be written by Hubbard. Death and rebirth, time
Yeah.
and again. The journey is worth everything because you are the hero, and your saga continues until the quest is fulfilled. That literally sounds like
Yeah.
a video game. Stupid.
Yeah. I mean, again, it works for some people, I guess. It doesn't.
Well,
It
who
gives that
who does it
air of,
work for, Mark? Who?
well,
Tell
there
me.
are 50,000 Eckists in the world, so I guess it works for them to some extent, but
They would
it's a
say it works for
subjective
them,
thing.
but
It's a subjective thing.
Scientologists
Yeah.
would say it works for them
Yeah.
too. But they couldn't
That's what
tell
I
you
mean. It's
what works.
subjective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is subjective. So
It's
subjective
your
that if you ask
experience.
them, yeah. Well, I would say I know what's
Yeah.
happening with their experience. They're going into altered states of consciousness. They're being
Yep.
depersonalized and disassociated, and they're having that reframed as some spiritual experience. But try telling them that, and they'll say, "No, I met God in some of these things," which maybe you
That's right.
do when you're in these altered states. Mark, I didn't contact a single real, actual past
Yeah.
life, and I'm telling you, I had diaries
Really?
full of this shit for years, trying to go through my memories and find out if maybe some of these really were real. I didn't just say Scientology's hypnosis and implanted false memories into me in one day. That conclusion
Yeah.
came like after just stacks of diaries going through all my past lives and realizing, you know what? That was all bullshit.
Yeah.
I can almost feel people
I know.
laughing because they're like, dude, you couldn't figure that out in day one. But no, once you're in something like that, even though you know it's illogical, at least, it takes a while to heal from even though you might know it's
Yeah.
stupid.
And the indoctrination is slow, so it doesn't just happen one day to the next. It takes time, and especially in Scientology, it really just starts with them convincing you that whatever your ruin is, it can be completely handled by Scientology, and then after that, so can everything. So you keep going
Hmm.
back and back and back, and then who knows? And then for me, after 3 years, I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? After 3 years, for some people it's longer, some people it's shorter, but and then you start thinking,
That's
well,
true.
the promises they made don't materialize, and
And
I'm
sometimes that
miserable.
can
And
take
why
a
am I
couple
miserable?
years. Yeah. And usually it takes
Yeah,
getting miserable to get the fuck out of these things. How
yeah,
about we move to
sure.
Quaker?
Oh
Interesting.
yes.
Um, so are these the infamous Quakers that we've heard about, or is this some other
Yeah.
denomination that you're going to take us through?
No, no, no. The Quakers, Religious Society of Friends, they are considered to be, I think, a Protestant Christian denomination, and there are
Hmm.
various denominations within the Quaker denomination. So there are people that are a little bit more hardline, traditional, and more Protestant. But then this particular group is what you call liberal Quakers. And liberal Quakers are kind of like people who we'll get into when we get into the Unitarian Universalists. They don't really have a particular creed when it comes to God. So there are what they call non-theist friends, which are people who just might be atheist, agnostic, or whatever. They might not necessarily be Christians, but they enjoy the Quaker communities, they enjoy the Quaker services, and everything is much more liberal. So that's really what this website is. Um, and so they claim about 375,000 people,
Wow.
377,000 people, and
Wow.
over almost half, so about 49-50% of members are actually in Africa. So they're pretty big
Really?
over there. But it originated in the United Kingdom, in England, in the 17th century. And what's very interesting is, along with the Quakers, um, Baptists and Methodists also originated in England, except they are way more popular in America than they are in England, which I think is kind of cool because they
Interesting.
obviously escaped the Anglican Church and the monarchy's persecution. And so they all got on ships and came to America, where they flourished, as did, by the way, the Mennonites and the Amish. They originated in Switzerland and Germany. So it's really interesting how there are European denominations founded in Europe, and then they go to America, and then they become way more popular than they ever could in Europe. So the gentleman's name was George Fox, mid 17th century. He started Quakers in England. It took off mostly, of course, in the United States. And they have congregations. What makes them interesting, though, is if you do go to a Quaker service, and there was a Quaker meeting house very close to where I lived in Santa Monica. It was actually like a 5-minute walk for where I lived around Santa Monica and 26th Street. There's no preaching, so if they get together sometimes in like I guess what you would call it, like a church like building with pews and stuff, or some will just sit around in a circle and on Sunday morning. There's no preaching, so what happens is the idea is everyone sits in a circle or they sit in their pews, and then when they feel compelled, someone will stand up and just talk about whatever is on their mind. And so the traditional Quakers believe
That's
that's like the
interesting.
Holy Spirit. The Holy
Hmm.
Spirit comes to you, and so you stand up and you talk. More liberal Quakers will just say, they might not use the word spirit, but who knows? Or they could use it more metaphorically. But you stand up and you sort of say whatever's on your mind. Like literally, it could be about society, religion. It could be about anything. It could be something that just is irking at you or whatever. And that's really the service, and it's actually quite interesting. They also have a lot of schools in the United States, including like divinity schools and even high schools and stuff like this, and they're all based upon the idea of like everyone is kind of at the same level. Nobody is preached. And so usually when they have their meetings, like even school meetings, students will get together, and that's the whole thing. Like they stand up, they say what's on their mind, they sit down, and then they have a kind of like a diplomacy kind of method about that. Like if you bring up a grievance, there's a particular way that they try to do things peacefully, and they communicate in a certain way. So it is really really fascinating, and it's famously, Quakers don't usually go to war. They usually do other kind of civil services when it's wartime. And yeah, it's just kind of a very fascinating kind of Christian. Some groups are not as much, but an interesting service to just not have a minister, and just you stand up and you say what's on your mind. You sit down. Kind of cool. Kind of
Fuck,
interesting.
dude, I'm sold. Out of all the ones that I've heard, that's the most sensible one that I've heard so far. Is there any relation to
Yeah.
the Amish or anything in terms of somebody?
No.
No. Okay, just curious because somebody had
No.
mentioned it too.
Amish and Mennonites again are very popular, of course, in like Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
But they're, I mean, Amish are way traditional. Some Mennonites are very liberal, but some Mennonites are very conservative. They are also considered peace churches, so they have some little things in common, like Amish and Mennonites don't go to war, they don't serve in the military. There's a
Do
little
they
bit of
make
overlap, but
quilts?
not. And the quilts, yeah, quilts. So of course, yeah, arts and crafts quilts.
Fucking
They're
A.
in Pennsylvania. For some reason, Pennsylvania was like the hot spot for a lot of these groups,
Hmm.
and there are like the Mennonites and the Amish. Some Quakers actually will have like flea markets. Well, they sell like handcrafts in
Cool.
Pennsylvania and certain parts of the Midwest. I guess Pennsylvania's in the Midwest, sort of that area, I guess, of the United States or Atlantic, whatever it's called. So there are some similarities, but as far as doctrine is concerned, like there are quite a few number of differences. But yeah, I mean Amish will make houses, they make barns, they also make furniture. Um, Quakers make quilts. I will tell you too, the famous brand Quaker Oats has nothing to do with Quakers. The Quaker Oats
That's good.
people
I'm glad to
called it
clear that up.
Quaker. They called it Quakers because the Quakers were considered to be very trustworthy. And so they called it Quaker Oats, but it has nothing to do with the Quakers. So that's one of the questions that
That's funny.
Quakers will get most asked is,
All the
do you have any
time.
any affiliate? Yeah, any
They probably
affiliation
get
with the Quaker Oats
sick of
people? And
hearing
they
that.
say no. They appropriated their name to sell an honest breakfast cereal, and that was all. So yeah, kind of cool, kind of interesting stuff.
You know what, Mark?
And
That's so interesting. I'm tempted to play
yeah,
these videos, and I don't think these look like I can get away with it without getting hit with the copyright. I mean, they're on,
I don't know,
they're
man. I don't
embedded in
know.
the frickin'. You don't think so? What do you guys think
I
in
would
the
be very,
comments? Why
very
can't I?
cautious.
Okay.
I don't
Why
know.
wouldn't
I'd
I
be
be
very
able to play
cautious.
these videos? The strike that we got last time was we played Teal Swan and all that stuff. That was no problem.
Yeah,
I just got the copyright strike because it was
SNL.
south yeah, SNL. I don't think they're gonna hit me
It was
with this
SNL.
fucking thing, man.
I
If
don't.
apostate
It doesn't
Alex,
seem like a.
if you know Alex, because you're the expert, or anybody else in social media, I don't think I'd get hit with the copyright strike. I need to know why this
Yeah.
guy was brought into Quakerism, and I want to hear the and the top 10
Well,
reasons why I'm a Quaker. What do you guys think? Should we
well.
go?
I was just I was going to say it doesn't sound like the Quaker thing to do would be to make someone have a copyright strike,
I
but you never know,
know,
man.
but
I don't know.
they might have the
You
Quaker
never know.
bots though set up.
That's what I'm
I think
saying.
it would
It
be fine, but I'm
doesn't
not. I
seem.
don't want to take it. I don't want to take a chance unless somebody
I
in the
wouldn't. I would
comments.
just.
Let's see. So
I
it's not
wouldn't.
copyright infringement if you're adding value. If you play it and I hear you, Alex, but that South Park thing could
I
fall
know.
into the same thing, but they kicked our ass for it. I think these would be fine, but why chance it, man? It's a pain in the ass if
I
it's
don't know,
not.
man. Yeah, I would just say to people, just go back to the website and
I'm going to link all
whatever.
these, Mark, in the description
Yeah,
box. So if
just
you
link
guys want to go
everything.
back
And,
to the web pages that we pull
yeah,
up of the 6 groups that we cover, please do that. Okay,
yeah, and
so
you can
we'll
see
move
they've hit
on.
YouTube, so they're technological.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
dude,
some famous
please.
people. Here's some famous Quakers. So, former President Richard Nixon grew up in a Quaker home. Not a very good person, but he did grow up in a Quaker home. The actor James Dean, Edward R. Murrow,
No,
and
really,
the
James
actress,
Dean.
yeah, and the actress Dame Judi Dench. She is an active Quaker,
No
and
shit.
so there are still Quakers in England. Not very many of them, but there are, and she's a Quaker. But I thought James Dean was interesting. I think his family
That's
were
very,
Quakers, and then
very interesting.
Edward R. Murrow, who's just a journalistic hero, who was really really good. He was also, I think, brought up in a Quaker home. So thought that was kind of cool. And then Nixon.
Nixon?
Yeah,
Wow.
Nixon.
Dude,
Yeah.
you're like a freaking trivia machine. How do you know all this stuff?
I just looked it all up just not too long ago. I've got it on my
Awesome.
phone
Thanks
now.
for doing
So
your homework, man. All
yeah, no
right, guys,
worries.
we have 2 more, and then I'm going to
Mhm.
ask him kind of how this compares to the Scientology experience. And please, if you have any questions, if you've been a part of any of these faiths or anything similar and you want to say something in the comments as we kind of wind down. See, we're already coming up to an hour. We're going to try to do these short and sweet, like an hour, because they go on too long and I like it. And Mark, if
Yeah.
you wouldn't mind, could I possibly bring you back for a part 5 so that
Yeah.
we can continue on with more? because
Yeah,
okay, let me
I
see.
would
Okay,
love
so
to.
what?
Yeah,
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you,
yeah, of
brother.
course.
I like you don't have to, but I realize I just put you on the spot, so you can tell
No,
me off
I
air if
do. I want
you
to.
can. Just kidding.
I
So
won't do
this
that.
next one, I'm going to take a crack at pronouncing this, Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong. The
I
Baha'i
will.
Faith. Did I get that?
Uh, Baha'i.
It's close.
So
I was close.
Baha'i. Yeah.
Baha'i. And before
That's
before
right.
you riff on
Baha'i.
this one, let me just go over their webpage real quick. So and see if we can see any similarities between the ones that we've covered and how they go about kind of because every religion or cult or group wants to try to pull you in and capture your attention. So guys,
Sure.
would you buy into this? Let your vision be world embracing. That's kind of vague and does not grab me. I like L. Ron Hubbard's thing where he says, "This book is more powerful than the discovery of the wheel and fire." This just isn't hitting me the same way. So let's see. Throughout history, God has sent to humanity a series of divine educators known as manifestations of God, whose teachings have provided the basis for the advancement of civilization. These manifestations have included Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad. By the way, L. Ron Hubbard claims to be all of those reincarnate. Baha'u'llah, the latest of these messengers. How are you going to have a messenger where you can't even pronounce his name? Explain that the religions of the world came from the same source, and notice source is capitalized. I'm getting restimulated with that alone, and are in essence successive chapters of one religion from God. I must have an MU because I'm already completely lost. Baha'i is believe the crucial need for, see, they misspelled a word on their own website, dude. How unprofessional is this? It's supposed to be Baha is believed the crucial need facing humanity is to find, maybe I read that wrong, is to find a unifying vision of the future of society and of the nature and purpose of life. Such a vision unfold, blah, blah, blah. So, Mark, where, first of all, where
Mhm.
in Los Angeles, since we know they have every religion known
Yeah.
to man, where did you find this one? And how long were you kind of there for before you jump into what it was about?
Santa Monica, they have a center
Santa
on
Monica.
Colorado, so it was only like 2, 3 blocks away from where I was living. So, I used to just walk there. The Baha'i Faith, it's called Baha'i Faith, and the
Hmm.
founder is Baha'u'llah, and they're Iranian. They're from Persia, which of course, was a Muslim majority country, still is today, was also, you know, was so 100, 200 years ago. Um, and this guy, Baha'u'llah, claimed to be a prophet. Now, if you know anything about Islam, you'll know that Muhammad was the final prophet, and there'll be no prophets after him.
Hmm.
So, this gentleman who says he's a prophet from God, God was speaking to him in his dreams. They didn't really get along with the Shiite Muslim majorities in Persia at the time. So he was persecuted, and even today, the Baha'i faith is not allowed to be a part of the Iranian society. So they hightailed it, and they went to the Ottoman Empire, and at the hightailed it to the Ottoman Empire, where they were allowed to flourish. And it says that they have about 5 to 8 million members worldwide.
Really?
They believe, so they believe in what would be called something around the lines of universalism, which we're also going to get into when we talk about the
Hmm.
Unitarians, which is a
Hmm.
different form. But the idea here again is that God sent a number of prophets, and that all of those prophets, like Krishna, Buddha, etc. Now, they all said different things, of course, but the idea is that they all, contributed to whatever religion. So they believe in like one world religion. They believe in one world government. A lot of people, at one point in the Baha'i faith, were learning Esperanto because Esperanto is supposed to be the one world language. So they have this kind of universalist approach to religion. Of course, though, Baha'u'llah and the teachings of the Baha'i faith are still superior to all the other ones. So
Hmm.
there
Of
is a little
course.
bit of open-mindedness, but there's also kind of a superiority a little bit, of course. But yeah, 5 to 8 million members worldwide, not billion, million.
Wow.
Um, but I mean, again, they're pretty mainstream. They are considered an Abrahamic faith, which means, they grew out from Islam, Christianity, Judaism, etc. At least according to them. Um, and like they have this sort of sounds very nice and sort of peaceful thing. You know, I went to the center in Santa Monica maybe a couple of times because it was so close and it was so interesting. I just wanted to look at it. And then UCLA had a Baha'i student group. Most people
Mhm.
are from Iran. They're Iranian, or they're in what's called diaspora, meaning that they grew up in another country other than the United States. So a lot of people that I knew either grew up in Israel or they grew up in US or Canada or England or whatever, because also in Israel is where if you type in the city of Haifa, which is Hiafa, which is in northwestern Israel, the first thing you'll see is this big, beautiful garden. And that's the headquarters of the Baha'i Faith. And it's called the Baha'i Gardens. So that is basically their city. I mean, the Baha'i Gardens on this hill and it looks down on the city. I've been to Haifa, it's gorgeous. They
How do
do
you
have
spell it, man? I'll
temples.
pull it up. How do you spell it?
Yeah,
I'll pull it up.
Haifa, Haifa. And usually it's like one of the first pictures you'll see is the Baha'i Gardens. They also have a really big temple in Chicago, apparently, for whatever reason. I don't know why. Probably must be a big community there. And also a really big one in New Delhi in India.
Hmm.
So what they do is one of the interesting tenets of this is they have a lot of, yeah, you see right there. You see
That's
these buildings on top of it.
beautiful.
Yes.
Oh
Yeah,
my
this is the
God, this is
Baha'i Gardens.
gorgeous. I wish,
Yeah,
let me
this
see
is
if
the
I can
Baha'i Garden. It's
increase it, guys,
amazing,
so you can see this. That's
breathtaking.
absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, and it's
Wow.
what they
I would
do is
join just
they
based on that. Oh, look at that. I just
good food,
now
by the
that's a
way. They
web
always
now
have good
that is
food.
a website that would pull me in.
Yeah,
If God
but they
exists up
have
at the
very
top of
very
this
good food in them.
temple, oh, they have good food?
Yeah, and you can walk up there.
Mhm.
It's gorgeous. What I will say
Wow.
is, what's interesting about it is, okay, so when they, prayer is a big part of most faiths, and it's a big part of the
Mhm.
Baha'i faith.
Mhm.
What they say is that you are required to say 3 prayers a day, but they could be from basically any religion. So they share Hindu prayers, okay, not any religion, as long as it's part of the 10 prophecy religions. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, or Baha'i. So people pray in different prayers and stuff like that. They share different prayers. But of course, at the end of the day, you're there because you're Baha'i. You're not there because you're pluralistic and multi faith. So there's this weird double edged sword where, like, they accept, you know, they accept these certain things that contradict each other, of course. But then what's superior is the fact that Baha'u'llah and all these other people, they were the prophets. And then, like Islam, they say Baha'u'llah, I think they say Baha'u'llah was the
Mm.
last prophet. If I'm not mistaken, someone can correct me on that. But so there's a couple things going on, but they're pretty harmless. In a sense, they have been persecuted, so they tend to be very tight knit. They don't really proselytize. They also say that they don't believe in partisan politics. So the idea is that, like, instead of voting, when they vote in the Baha'i faith, instead of voting on political party lines, you should vote based on the politician, which is kind of interesting. And whatever, like, they have these kinds of interesting sort of, again, universalistic type beliefs. And also it got pretty big in America during the New Age movement because, of course, they're accepting all these different religions and things like that. So it kind of got a spike in the middle 20th century. And they have centers again in Santa Monica. I think they have other centers around Los Angeles.
Of
They have
course.
one in Toronto. I mentioned the temples before. So they're fairly worldwide. There's a group here in Hungary. So, like, most major European cities and most major cities around the world will have some kind of Baha'i, center or groups. So, and yeah, as I said, it's, what is it, 5 to 8 million members is quite a lot. So yeah,
It's still about 5 million members shy of what Scientology claims to have, but they'll get there soon.
20 million,
How
yeah,
how many were you told when you were in Scientology? I was told between 10 and
10
15
to 50,
million.
yeah,
Yeah.
10 and 15 million,
Did it shock the
yeah.
shit out of you when you found out we only had 25,000 members worldwide? That was a head fuck.
Not only that, but I've been meaning to actually say this on the previous 3 interviews,
Please.
which is when I was reading about sort of critical stuff on Scientology when I had left, and I came across this sociologist who said that Scientology, the Church of Scientology, Dianetics, and all affiliated groups have never contributed to any form of positive social change in human society to date. I was floored because, as you know, we're the only ones that are doing anything. We're curing, drug addiction. We're rehabilitating criminals. The Way to Happiness. I remember when I was in, The Way to Happiness was distributed in Ukraine during some violent protest, and everyone was just calm after The Way to Happiness was distributed. When I read that, I was floored. That, and I was like, they've never contributed to any. There's no evidence of them contributing to any positive form of positive social change in society since 1950. And I was like, what?
Did that cause you to
that
kind of
floored me.
start to question it a little bit?
Yep.
This is when you were in Scientology,
I had been
right?
questioning. No, I was out, and I guess there's a few months after. So
you
I'd
read
already
that.
mentally been out.
Okay.
But it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, there isn't any evidence at all. Because if there's evidence, someone could find it. Like if you were a sociologist and you were studying religious community, social action, whatever, if Scientology was actually doing what they say they were doing, there would be evidence.
But
there
the
would be mounds of
evidence,
evidence.
I know,
But
but the evidence to us was we were just told at the events by David Miscavige about all
exactly,
these. Again, we were back to the fancy
exactly,
videos and everything, Mark, keeping you in the Truman Show. All we had to do,
exactly.
I mean, this is the thing to get across to people. Like, we really can't see it. We really are on like the Truman Show. So even though me and
Yeah.
Mark were able to move out and about and learn information, once we're programmed, we're in a bubble world. So when we just get the information from the events that David Miscavige is putting
That's
on
right.
him, and there's these 3-hour events where he shows us people, slick videos of people passing out the way to happiness at this disaster, that disaster. The volunteer ministers are showing in these slick videos. They're here, they're at 9/11, they're everywhere. So we believe that because just like the news, if that's your only source of information, what the fuck else are you going to believe? Unless we were to go on the internet or question or somehow break that trauma bond programming, there's no way we would discount what we were being told by Miscavige. It's really silly, Mark, looking back at it, but it's powerful when you don't know what you're under,
Well, again, and it's like that
Yeah,
sentence
exactly.
just
Good
threw me
propaganda goes a
off.
long way. And it's amazing. Propaganda is corny. And then when I look at the tools that were used, repetition and propaganda thrown at us, they're very simplistic tools that these dictators use, but they fucking work. I mean, you wouldn't think I wouldn't want to pound somebody every day with propaganda. Like advertisement to me is like the most evil thing ever. It's like I wouldn't even think of doing something as a technique to control others, to sell them, or to run a dictatorship. But these people, they are willing to do really corny, very simplistic things like let's just bombard the human mind 24/7 with our message and it'll work. They'll believe it. They can't resist it. That reminds me of Nazi Germany, where it was said that, and Jonestown, when Jonestown was running the tapes over the loudspeakers. And the quote was something along the lines of, you catch people between the ears and the eyes. So if you just keep hitting them through, bombarding them, it will work because there's kind of nowhere for your mind to run. You know what I mean?
I was just a little interrupted. Sorry.
Yeah, that's
sorry about
perfect
that
though.
again.
Perfect timing because I was done speaking. You look because you froze. You look like you had your TRs in massively, and I felt like I was really being listened to. Thank you for that, Mark.
I duplicate you utterly, and I duplicate
totally
the
got that
situation
you
utterly.
duplicate me. Yes.
Well,
by the way,
your duplication has been duplicated.
Thank you. And Marcus says 52 extras.
Oh, you're welcome.
Guys, if you haven't, please go check out Marcus's channel. You can find the link to the description box in the interviews that we did yesterday. It's a lot of awesome information and is an ex-Scientologist as well.
So for the Baha'is,
just please
continue. Close
up on this is really fascinating, man. Yes.
And
because there has to be famous members in this, right?
Yeah. So the only one I forgot to mention was the only group where I couldn't find any famous members was Eckankar. So either there's nobody who's famous, or they just don't care, which is actually kind of humble.
That surprises me because
I know.
I was going to say, because just from the very fact that they're a takeoff of Scientology, I would think that they would have the most artists. That's funny.
Someone can maybe Google famous eckists. Maybe you'll find, but the only
Is that what
list that
they're
I found
called?
was
Eckists?
eckists. Yeah,
That's even
ECKist.
stupider than
So you can.
Scientology.
However, the only people that I ever found was Paul Twitchell and Harold Klemp, who are the two founders and current leader. So
Yeah.
okay, so for Baha'i members, the actor Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight Schrute on The Office, and who's been
Oh,
in tons of movies and stuff. He was born and raised as a Baha'i, and he I think in Chicago, so he has a connection to the Chicago Temple. Also, a gentleman named Penn Begley, who was on Gossip Girl and the Netflix show You. He plays Joe.
I've seen.
So he is Baha'i. Of an old actor, I think he was in The Godfather. His name is Alex Rocco. Very distinct voice. He was a Baha'i, and when he won an Emmy about in the 70s, he actually thanked Baha'u'llah and the teachings of the Baha'i faith um, because of his Emmy win. And then finally, very interestingly, there's lots of African American Baha'is who were jazz musicians, including Dizzy Gillespie. So
I
a
thought you
lot
were
of
going to say
New
the Jazz
York,
Aces. Yeah.
no,
Inside
the
joke. Yeah.
the African American among the African American jazz community in Chicago, New York, and so forth. There was a big in the 50s and stuff. There was quite quite a lot of people that joined the Baha'i. So Dizzy Gillespie is the most famous from all of them. So yeah, so again, actors there and a couple actors and musicians mostly. Creative types. And just off the
Interesting.
top of my head, back in the 70s, there was a soft rock band called Seals and Crofts.
I never.
They did like Summer Breeze and stuff. Anyways, I think they were Baha'is as well. So some pretty high profile members, but they don't use them in advertising. So not like Scientology. Here's a famous face. That's why you should join.
Yeah, like
They
Tom
don't do that.
Cruise.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Very,
exactly.
very
So my
interesting.
my 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 affiliation or whatever it was, my discovering was limited again, just because I found other things to do. That's usually how I say it. Like there was nothing necessarily right or wrong about it, and just being someone that has a religious affiliation, I know it's not perfect. I know that there's advantages and disadvantages, so I don't want to be condescending. But sometimes it's just some things just don't hit you, and some things do, and that's sort of the way way it was for me. So good people, nice people, just not my thing. Um, that was all, basically.
Excellent information, man. This is really, really
Yeah.
fascinating. And by the way, speaking of musicians who are cult members, or shall we say ex-cult members,
Hmm.
yeah, thanks for posting that, Amanda. I think she's talking about I posted "Don't Give Up." Oh, Marcus, I was going to ask you if I could just post that. We did an interview yesterday with a musician / ex-Scientologist named Marcus, and he did this beautiful song about what it's
Oh,
like being in a cult called "Going Clear." And Marcus, I wanted to know if I could clip that and put it up on the channel and throw in some slides or whatever. It's a beautiful song. But
wow.
congratulations on getting out too, my man. Okay, Mark, let's do. I think we've been waiting for the grand finale here. Let's see. We covered the
Well,
Baha'i, Quaker.
there's one before,
Remind me
two
of
on the
which one
left.
it is, and I'll pull it up.
So we have the Hare Krishnas, and then we have the Unitarian Universalists.
Okay, let me pull up the Hare Krishnas. Well, it doesn't look like I have a. Oh, here we go. Okay, give me 1 second on that.
Yeah, of course, of
Um,
course.
okay, still not an expert on learning how to share these screens quickly. So that would be. Okay, I have to close some of these
International
channels here.
Association of
Yeah,
Krishna
that's the one.
Consciousness. Yeah, the big one.
I really want to play
Something
one
like
of these freaking Quaker
ISK.
videos. It's just staring at
I
me,
know,
Marcus.
man.
Mark, I know we can play one of these, man. Like, what? Why would they copyright? Very.
I don't know. Maybe we can do
Okay.
commentary, so it's fair use.
Yeah, I know. I just would love to show people, and I'm very curious myself what some of these things are. But okay, let me pull this thing up. So you have it. Leave this site. Okay, hang on. I will get this very, very quickly.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, Hare Krishnas, I can just get into some of that. So Hare Krishnas was started, the
Yeah.
gentleman was a Swami. His name was Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Try.
Okay.
Can you say that twice? Can you say that fast 10
I
times?
not fast, but I could say Bhakti Vedanta Swami
Jeez.
Prabhupada or something like this. And it was founded in 1966. This the gentleman there. There's a couple
Which one
pictures
is
of him
he?
that you can see.
Is it
That
him right
guy with
here?
your cursor, and
Okay.
then go down one and over to the right twice.
This
Yeah,
guy?
those are him. That's him. Well, that
This
actually is him. I don't know about the other guy. It might
okay,
be
this
him.
is
Then again, I'm not sure actually. Anyway, sorry.
it's okay. No,
So it
it's
was
fine.
founded in 1966, so right in the age of the hippies and
Of course.
so forth. They claim about 1 million members worldwide, and they come from Hinduism. So I think Krishna, and I'm just going to look up this. They do worship Krishna in Hinduism. They have um, kind of, it's not really polytheistic, but that's kind of what we in the West kind of think of it, because there are many gods. But the idea is that there is one like larger kind of godlike figure, although they don't call it God. I think they call it Brahman, which is kind of
Mm.
like a higher power. And then all the gods that are in Hinduism are considered to be avatars, or like, you know,
Is that the equivalent of
creations, or
Hubbard's, like, where you're not your body?
yes, it's kind of like that, but they're all sort of a
Okay.
part of, God. Okay. So
Mhm.
Krishna, for example, there's a trinity in Hinduism. There's
Mm.
Brahma, who's the creator. There's Vishnu, the maintainer, and then Shiva's the destroyer. Within them, they have different reincarnations. So Krishna is a reincarnation of Vishnu, who is considered, one of the highest gods in Hinduism. So I think from Hare Krishna, they sort of worship Krishna, and they have their own theology and their own mystical kind of teachings around that. But they are considered to be unorthodox in the Hindu faith for a couple of reasons. The first is they do proselytize, which is something that Hindus don't do. Usually you're born into Hinduism, similar to other what's called ethno religions like Judaism. You tend to be born into it. Zoroastrian, you're born into it. Shintoism, you're born into it. And then after that, if you choose to do whatever with it is after that. But they look for members. Many years ago when I was in Los Angeles, and I didn't tell you this story, but the very first day that I flew into Los Angeles, or the first time in my life, was in May of 2005. I think like May 5th or something of 2005, and I flew from Toronto and to LAX, and I was waiting at the carousel for my luggage, and I got approached by a Hare Krishna, and for $10, I got a copy of their text, which is called the Bhagavad Gita as is, and a DVD about the Swami guy, about the founder. I still have that to this day. So the Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu text. Many Hindu texts are long poems that have to do with war and all this kind of stuff. It's really kind of cool. And there's large poetries, and there's other books like the Upanishads. But the Bhagavad Gita has been around for a very long time. And this is the Bhagavad Gita as is. So this is this gentleman, this there Hare Krishna Swami, sort of reinterpreting and putting on a bunch of different Krishna-esque, Krishna-centered kind of teachings to a very ancient Hindu text. And they also, of course, you can always know who a very devout Hare Krishna is, because they usually dress very differently. They usually shave their head, or they might just
Mhm.
have a single ponytail. They wear
Mhm.
Indian style clothing, usually robes, and they pretty much, most of them have a sort of a monastic lifestyle. And what's interesting about that is, kind of reminds me a little bit of the Sea Org in a way, or like a fraternity. There are these restaurants throughout the world that are called Govindas. Okay, so Govinda, Govinda. That's, and yeah, Scott Davidson. That's the chant, which I'm going to get into in a second. Um, and Govindas, if I believe, if you are a Hare Krishna, you get to eat in these restaurants for like free. They're also vegetarians and vegans. So if you don't have a lot going on, if you maybe are, you know, in poverty and stuff like this, you get 3 meals a day. You can join this community. So in the hippie days, when people were kind of being vagabonds and kind of going out and, going in their van and whatever, a lot of people became Hare Krishnas because they could go to temples, they could go to these restaurants. I guess they have a membership card or something. I don't know. They flash something and they get a meal. So, you know what I mean? It was like something where people were joining to kind of get those quote unquote perks. Um, it's very interesting. You talk to Hindus about this. They tend to look at it the way Christians, mainline Christians view Mormons, where it's like they have this unorthodox kind of interpretation. Some of them roll their eyes because most people, when they think of Hinduism, they probably think of some aspects of the Hare Krishnas because they have been influenced into pop culture more. So you know what I mean? Like it's that type of thing. Like Hare Krishnas are more visible,
Yes.
and they also have parades. So in the city of Toronto, they have something I think called like India Day or something, and it's basically a Hare Krishna parade. They have them all over the world. It's usually in the summer, and it's not like a Hindu festival for Hindus. It's specifically about India, but the actual organization is the Hare Krishnas, and proselytizing their Hare Krishna philosophy. So it's yeah, it's probably the most like a cult because they're very high demand. I believe that when you get in, there's different levels. Like you get in as a novice and you have to kind of go up
So
this sort of chain, and
mhm.
they chant all the time, they dress differently, there's a very conformity kind of attitude. And I don't mind going to places like Convindas or whatever because it's a nice restaurant. They have really good food. They don't preach in the restaurants or anything because I think there's a separation there. But I have also been to the Toronto Hare Krishna Temple and the Hare Krishna temples in Los Angeles, mainly for the food. To be completely honest with you,
Okay.
nothing else for, just to eat, which they cook good food. So I'm just
I hear you. That's all. Hey,
that's my thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Food's an
And
easy way to
Scientology,
hook anybody. Would
Scientology
feed
has the
any. They,
Renaissance. Is the Renaissance and CC
hmm
and
Of
Celebrity
course,
Center?
that's a great, yeah,
Amazing.
for the
Brunch
rich
there
people
is
and for
fantastic.
the public, but not for you, as we discussed when you were on staff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
you
no,
were the
not on
opposite.
staff. No.
You were starving as a staff member in
Yeah,
Scientology. Yeah.
exactly. But anyway, and interestingly, being in Hungary, so in southwestern Hungary, we have a big lake called Lake Balaton.
Hmm.
And just south of there, there's a village. I forget the name of it. It's a long Hungarian name. And they have their own village. So if you go to the village, you can stay in boarding houses. They have govindas, they have all kinds of stuff. So it's called Hare Krishna Village, which in Hungary, I think it's like Hare Krishna Falu or Falu, something like that, which means village. I can't remember what word they use. But it's in this, it's on the south part of the southern part of Lake Balaton, and it's maybe a half an hour south. So people get the trainer, they drive there. There's a campground and stuff like this, and so there's like this big, statue of Krishna, and there's like these Indian kind of buildings and stuff like this. And the other thing that I do like, which reminds me, is I'm a big fan, and I don't know why, of religious bookstores and gift shops. And the Hare Krishnas always have a bookstore or gift shop. So do the Eckankars. So do a lot of these groups. They have like Soka Gakkai. Their bookshop is on Wilshire and 4th Street in Santa Monica. I don't know what it is. I love religious tchotchkes and like
Interesting.
books and beads and little
That's
things that you
understandable.
could put on your car or in a little shrine or whatever. And Hare Krishnas always have some really
Oh,
awesome gift
yes, they
shops
do. Hell
because
yeah.
they also sell the clothing. So
Hmm.
if you want to get like Indian style clothing, they're called
Yeah.
kurtas or whatever, you can get them there. And I don't know, I love it. I just love that. Love
No,
looking
I
around
understand
and
that.
seeing all that different
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah. It's kind of cool.
definitely.
But yeah, Hare Krishnas again. I think they're the more most like a cult conformist type thing. If you go around more, like I was living not terribly far from a Govinda, so maybe once a week I was visiting Govindas because it's cheap and it's nice. They start to kind of want you to, go to services and stuff like this. So, that's kind of like, and I wasn't really into it. And then of course they do, like what in Scientology, they bring the most attractive girls, and
Of
attractive
course.
young women,
Yep.
of course. So I met a young woman from Chechnya. She was unbelievable, trying to get you, all this kind of stuff. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, come on. I know what they're
It's
doing. This was
always the
after
same.
Scientology.
Yeah.
So I knew it's the same crap, right? Yeah.
And
So,
somebody earlier
um,
mentioned that there's 4,000 religions, so there's going to be similarities. Yeah, but it
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
amazing how similar the
That's
different
why,
groupings are. Yeah.
in comparative religion studies, which is a really
Mm-hmm.
cool subject, they
Mm-hmm.
don't really use the term Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or Hindu. They use Christianities, Judaisms, because there isn't
Interesting. That's
anything called Christianity, because
right. That's a good point.
Christianity, Catholicism is different from Mormonism, which is different from Protestantism.
Mhm.
Then within those groups, Pentecostals are different from Methodists, so they're completely different. I belong to the conservative Jewish movement. The Reform is very different. The Orthodox are from another planet. Within the Orthodox, there's modern movements and there's hardcore ultra Orthodox movements. I have probably more in common with like a Baha'i and a Methodist than I do with some hardcore, black hat ultra Orthodox Haredi Jew. Even though we're both
Mm-hmm.
Jewish, our practices and our social and political beliefs are so different, especially culture. So just saying Christianity in a kind of
Yeah.
deductionist way or Judaism or even religion, it's just not helpful. It's more helpful to be specific. And that's why I really
Definitely.
love comparative religious studies, because it's not saying that one is better than the other. We're just comparing
Mhm.
some of the different ideas, and we're looking at the different denominations, the different movements, how they differ, and realizing it's effing complicated. And saying that they're either all right or all wrong, or one is right and one is wrong, it doesn't really do anything to the conversation. So I just look at it like, I have a particular, viewpoint, and other people have other viewpoints, and that's cool. So we can
And as Scientology says, the more viewpoints that you can assume, the more
uh,
OT you are. So that's very OT of you,
well,
Mark.
there you go. I
All
appreciate
right,
that, I
let's move
guess.
on. Let's move to the final one here. We've
Oh,
covered.
again,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, yeah.
I
Please.
always like to do famous members.
Oh yes.
George
Sorry,
Harrison,
man. This.
of course.
Sorry.
George Harrison, which is no, it's
Right.
okay. It's okay.
Of course.
George
George
Harrison, which was
Harrison.
mentioned in the chat, he apparently,
Mm-hmm.
when he passed away, he was actually chanting Hare Krishna. So, which is what you're supposed to do before you die.
Really? That's what you're supposed to do
Yeah,
before you die, as a way
yeah, you're
to
supposed to
as a
chant.
way to what? Transcend to the next. What's the theory
Trans.
behind it?
I guess I'm not sure,
There,
but to
I'm
transcend
sure
to
it
the
means
next thing.
something. If
Yeah.
anybody knows why you need to chant, no, I'd be curious. Does that mean you're going to go to
Yeah.
heaven? Do they believe in reincarnation? Are they going to, if they do the right
I
chant, will
think
they
they
come
believe in
back?
reincarnation. Yeah. But anyway, that's what he was doing, apparently, reportedly.
Okay.
So who knows if it's really true? American poet Allen Ginsberg, who was a
No
beatnik
shit.
and he was into Hare Krishna. The actress
I did
Haley
not know
Mills,
that. That's very interesting.
Haley Mills, and then Russell Brand, the comedian, is also a Hare Krishna. So
And
some
apparently
people
a
are more
Freemason
devout.
too, because it's got
Yeah.
the 33 and
Yeah.
whatever. We can get into him later, but he was a Hare
Yeah.
Krishna at one point. I can
He is.
absolutely
He is
see.
a Hare
I can
Krishna.
absolutely.
Yeah.
He is or
He is.
was.
No, he is.
What?
He's
You sure
a
about that?
member of. Yeah, he's a member of the
I had no idea. That's
International Society of
surprising.
Krishna Consciousness. So he is a Hare Krishna.
That's
Yeah,
very surprising. I didn't know
yeah.
that.
So yeah, so
Interesting.
again, they have some famous members, but yeah, Ginsburg, Haley Mills, Russell Brand, George Harrison
Wow.
is probably their most. And George Harrison, I think also, someone could look this up for me. In the
Mhm.
60s, I believe he donated an estate in England where the head Swami went and then started Hare Krishnas in England. And I think that estate was owned by George Harrison. Like when he got money from the Beatles, he bought this estate, and then I think he turned it over to the Hare Krishnas. So they got their hold in England at that estate, and I think it's still around. I don't know where it is, somewhere in the countryside, but there you go. So yeah.
Very
All right.
interesting. No, I really
Last
like
but
these
not least, I
breakdowns.
guess.
Okay, no, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I like how you tag on who are the celebrities of these groups at the very end,
Hey,
I want to know
that's my
who the celebrities
Scientology
are. So
PR experience. Yeah.
it's cool, man. I like it. This is a fantastic breakdown you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we saved the best for last, just because this is the one that you spent the most time in. But let's
course.
see.
Yes.
This one is called the Unitarian Universalist
Mhm.
Association. And let
Right.
me just see if there's anything interesting, Mark, here on the website before I let you
Of
take it away.
course. Yeah.
I'm telling you, I know we can play these fucking things, but YouTube's been so up my ass. I really don't
Dude,
want to chance
I
it.
wouldn't, yeah, I
All
wouldn't
right.
chance
You
it,
keep
man.
talking me
Just,
down, Mark. Thank you. You keep talking me
I
down,
know.
dude. I appreciate it. I'm so want
It's what I
to.
do.
It's a good call. I know that's what you're here for, man. Help me out. Okay, what is this thing, man? And well, first of all,
Okay.
Mark, would you
So,
mind telling me where it was at in LA? And then
yeah.
also, since you spent the most time at this one, how much time did you
Yeah.
spend here?
Well, there was what's called the Unitarian Universalist, I think they call it a community center or community church, which is in Santa Monica at
Hmm.
Arizona and like 18th Street. So I lived maybe a mile away, maybe a little less, maybe three-quarters of a mile away. So it took maybe 15 minutes to walk. And I would go there quite often on Sunday mornings, and I would also go there sometimes in the evenings. There's also plenty of places all over Los Angeles and the Valley and the city and South Bay in San Diego. Like there's tons of congregations all over the place. And you just type in zip code, and you could probably find one there. They're all over the place, especially in the West Coast and very much on the East Coast, in especially Massachusetts and New England. So it's a very interesting religion. So the first thing is, who are the Unitarians and the Universalists used to be Christians, okay? And there were two different types of Christians with two different types of theologies. Both were considered Protestants. So the first one was what was called Unitarianism, and Unitarianism, very ironically, starts in Transylvania in around the 16th century, and it comes from what's called the Edict of Torda, which is when a bunch of people got together and essentially they were against the Trinity. They didn't believe in the Trinity, so Father, Son, Holy Spirit. What they believed in was that God was one. So God was a unity rather than a Trinity. And those churches still exist in mainly the Hungarian speaking communities in Hungary, Transylvania, and some of the surrounding areas. So if you do go to Transylvania today, you can go to those, more older, what they call Transylvanian Unitarian congregations. And some of them are part of this Unitarian Universalist Association, some of them are not. It just depends on the particular congregation. So kind of an interesting thing. Also remember, the anti-Trinitarianism was something that people like Sir Isaac Newton believed. So there had been in England, there had been these different kinds of churches that were coming up around the time of Sir Isaac Newton, but it really got hold in Transylvania in the 16th century. And I think there was a Hungarian king, one of the Zigmunds, who also converted to Unitarianism. Of course, he was quickly ousted and then went back to being Catholic. But it's a very influential faith in Central Europe, especially among Hungarian speakers and Romanian speakers. So it's kind of cool. And then it came to the United States, like most churches, probably through Western Europe. And around 100 years ago, most of the congregations prior to World War One were in New England. So for whatever reason, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, etc., had a lot of intellectuals. And in the early 20th century, many intellectuals and also many civil rights leaders in the mid 20th century were themselves Unitarians. And there's a saying that if you go to Massachusetts, every single town in Massachusetts has two churches, guaranteed to have two churches. One will be Unitarian and one will be Congregationalist. And that is true for anything. You could pick out a small town, Braintree, Concord, whatever, okay? Which Concord is how they actually say it. Concord is how we would say it with our R's. But you just pick out a little place and you'll find that there will Greenfield. There'll be either one of those two churches. So it was very, very influential. The other one, which is called the Universalists, they had what was called the Universalist Church of America, and they came from England. They came over, and they were more the church of, I guess you could say, the working class people, farmers. They used to do revivals. It was kind of popular throughout the Midwest a little bit. Now, their theology is very interesting because in the middle 20th century, they took a big hit. Universalist Christians, or at least part of this particular group, they believed everybody went to heaven. So you can imagine that after World War I, and especially after World War II, that was a very difficult thing to believe. You're talking about Hitler and Stalin and the Nazis and the Red Army, and they're all going to heaven. That people couldn't, after the atrocities of World War I and World War II, it didn't really make much sense. So in 1961, with dwindling membership, and especially in the 1950s, the Unitarians and the Universalists started sharing conferences and youth groups. They used to get together, and then in 1961 they decided to form this new association, which they called the Unitarian Universalist Association. And so if you go to different congregations, they will have, if they're older than 1961, they will usually come from the Unitarian side, the Universalist side, or another kind of side, because they also absorbed other groups that were called
Really?
humanist groups, religious humanist groups.
Hmm.
And religious humanism is the majority of Unitarians identify as religious humanists. Now, when most people think of humanism, they think of secular humanism, they think of no God or whatever,
Yeah, it's
but
exactly
that's
what I
not
thought of.
necessarily the
Like
same.
atheism.
It's not though. In religious humanism, you can be an atheist, but you can also believe if you want. The crux of the whole thing is the difference between religious and secular humanism is the stance on religious rituals.
Mm.
So at the Unitarian Universalists, they light a chalice, and that chalice is considered to be a religious ritual. It's a very minimum religious ritual, but that's what they do. Secular humanists don't like religious rituals. Some people don't like them. I love religious rituals. Some people don't. And so that was the dividing line. So there tends to be more
Yeah.
people who are atheists who go to secular
Th-
humanists, whereas,
That's that's what I think of, Mark, when I hear
yeah,
humanism. Maybe I'm wrong, but transhumanism, yeah, where they want to turn us into humans 2.0, where we
yes,
merge with man with
that's
machine.
that's something
Fuck that.
different. That's something different. That's
Uh,
cyborgs. Um,
I think
but
so.
it's anyway very interesting. It happened in the United States, and of course, Canada also has Unitarian congregations. There's some in England, Australia, New Zealand, mostly in the English-speaking world, but also in Latin America there are. So today, what it is, it's considered a new religion. They're not considered Christians anymore. They're considered
Mm.
Unitarian Universalists. I mentioned the majority of people are religious humanists. They also do not have a specific creed when it comes to God. So they do have a creed. You can look on the website, and they have what are called I think articles and inspirations, or the seven principles, and then there's different inspirations. And because they're universalist, they draw, and they're very pluralistic. So then they draw from different philosophies, religions, etc. So if you are an atheist, agnostic, materialist, skeptic, free thinker, you can join a congregation. If you're Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, etc., you can be a part of a congregation. So it's very pluralistic, and a lot of people of different religions and different backgrounds. Um, but the majority tend to be humanists. There's also still 10 or 15% are still Christians. And then they even have people that practice like nature worship, so meaning
Hmm.
paganism or
Yeah.
some kind of indigenous spirituality. They also have different groups. So there'll be environmental groups, social justice groups. There's all kinds of different things that they do, meditation groups, whatnot. So I enjoy it, and I'm probably, of all these groups, that was the one I spent a few years in. Just for me personally, um, because I always was going back to Judaism, then I
Hmm.
just liked it more, and was thinking to myself, well, you're always going back. Why don't you, just actually go and do this Jewish thing? But for me, I've probably, outside of Judaism, most likely the biggest inspiration that I've drawn on my views of religion comes from Unitarian Universalism and religious humanism,
Interesting.
which is basically like, regardless of not that there is or isn't a God, I still love religious rituals. I still enjoy the community aspect. I still think religion has value and a function in society. There's a book called The Sociology of Religion by Max Weber, which was written again about 100 plus years ago. It's excellent. Religion does have a function in society, whether or not we are individual members or not. It's not going anywhere. It can be better. And so a lot of these more liberal groups, and mainline groups that I've mentioned before, that are not cults, that are constructive and so forth, they do exist. that is separate on whether or not objective claims of metaphysics and whatnot. I understand that's different. It also doesn't excuse abuse that people have because of religion, which is always bad. Doesn't matter what the abuse is. But in my opinion, I would say that, like, whatever, there's still something interesting, and religion does play quite a role, like quite a big role in our society. And government, I think it should be much less. But regardless, it's here, and I would prefer more religions to be more liberal and more mainline rather than abusive like Scientology, which I think everyone could get behind. The last thing I'll say about the Unitarian Universalists. Okay, if anybody out there is like hardcore anti-religious,
Yeah.
but in the way that you're hardcore anti-religious, where literally it's ruining your life, meaning that you're an angry person, you're very resentful, you can't have a conversation, you're always being triggered. For the love of God, type uua.org into your search engine, type in your postal code, and try to make a connection with the Unitarian Universalists. Even if you're an atheist, they don't give a shit. They don't
Really?
care
Why
if
do
you're
you
an
say
atheist
that?
or not.
Why do you say that? That's an interesting. That's
Because
a bold statement. Yeah.
I've seen people who have come from either religious abusive households, or meaning like fundamentalist Christian households, or and they've become like hardcore, affecting their life, kind of anti-religious, and they go to a couple of services for the Unitarians, and they're like, holy shit, I didn't know that religions could be like this. And because it's widely available in the United States, they're pro LGBTQ, women take leaderships, they have progressive social values. It really is come as you are. Everyone is welcome. Okay.
Sounds like a
There are
Nirvana song.
people, I love that song, by the way. I love
It's a
Nirvana.
great
It's like
song. Yeah.
my favorite band.
Maybe they should play
But
that in their congregations to
I think they
amplify the
should.
point. Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Religion is, sadly, and I understand this, so I'm not trying to make I'm not trying to take away anybody's pain or anything, okay? But here's the thing. Because in comparative religion studies, one church doesn't represent all of something. So let's say somebody grows up in like a terrible, horrible church, Christian church, or a synagogue,
Scientology
or
or
whatever.
Scientology
Exactly.
or cults
Please
qualify for your.
understand that even if you don't want to believe in the spiritual stuff, that's up to you. That's cool. Okay. But religion itself is so complicated that there is a huge spectrum. So you might have grown up on one side of the horrible, disgusting abusiveness, going to a UU church and realizing that religion can be a 180 from what you grew up will heal you. Now, you could still be an atheist, you can still be agnostic, maybe you'll change your beliefs, maybe you won't, maybe you'll become a member, maybe you won't, but at least understand that out there is something completely different and
And it's
very
not like
accessible if you live in
Scientology,
the United
Mark,
States. It's
where it
absolutely
says
not.
that you can believe in anything that you like, but then it slowly beats it out of you. Like this is something where they genuinely do not push.
They do have principles. They have 7
Mm-hmm.
principles. So that would be their creed. But when it comes to God, they don't have a creed, meaning you believe or if you don't. I have seen people over the years, because I've been in and out of UU churches for about 10 years. I have seen people and spoke to people who were so angry and hurtful and hateful for good reasons because they were abused. That's it. I'm not going to say, not going to dismiss this, but they go to these Unitarian churches and the anger melts off of them and they start to think differently and they're communicating with people who might not agree with their theological stance and they're having great conversations. And you know what? Even if after a couple of months or whatever, they stop going, there's still a healing process because that's what people need to do. They need to heal. And the UU place really helped me heal from Scientology because I didn't grow up very religious at all. We never went to church or synagogue. I have some Christian family. I have Jewish family. Okay. And there are a lot of good constructive groups out there. But when you have an experience with a destructive group, it can really sour your experience for an entire subject. So in my opinion, and I'm just saying this as an opinion, if you hold that kind of anger, that's not good. You need to just melt it away, and especially if you've been holding on to the anger for a long time. So I'm not telling you that you have to believe in something different. I'm not saying you have to change your personality or change who you are, but just knowing that the UUs are out there and that they don't reject gay people, they don't reject skeptics or atheists, they don't reject, they're very inclusive and very pluralistic. It can help. Now, I'm not you, you're not me, especially if I'm talking to someone here who's watching this who has had an abusive religious household and now are kind of very anti-religious. I'm not you, you're not me, of course. We have different experiences, but I would say uu.org, type in your zip code, see if there's a congregation that's you can drive to, email people, just say like, this is my, and a lot of people that come to EU, or come to the UUA, come to it in places where they have had some religious fundamentalists. There are a lot of ex fundamentalist Catholics and Protestants that go to the UUA, or the UU churches and congregations, and it helps them kind of being able to move past some of these things. You don't have to forget it, you don't have to like it, but just understanding that religion comes in so many different flavors, and that it can be pluralistic and liberal and socially active and inclusive is wonderful. It's a really good feeling to be like, wow, this is a religion just like every other religion, and yet all of those horribly abusive things don't happen. And it's part of a constructive way of dealing with maybe some traumas, which absolutely can and do exist. And so moving past some of these things and getting to a place where you can relate better with people, I don't know. To me, I wish I had known that earlier, because I started getting into the UUs maybe 5, 6 years after I left Scientology, and I think it would have helped me, or maybe not 5 or 6 years. Excuse me. I started getting into it Los Angeles, but I kind of wish that I had had that background before. Anyway, long story short, I might be misremembering some dates here, but I just wish that I had known that before. I had even joined Scientology, and then the recovery
Interesting.
process. It can just be very helpful. So this is just advice. You don't have to take it if you don't want to, but that's it. I don't know what else to say. I hope that people take that to heart. But again, I'm not
Sure.
you. You're not me. I'm not going to make your decisions. But the UUA is very, very healthy. So it's very good
You know
place.
what I find interesting about you, man, is that, you could have just stuck with Judaism strictly. Just that's my
Yeah,
religion. That's what I grew up in. That's all I know. I really like the fact that you've checked out all these different things and you seem to take a smorgasbord because, of things. And you don't really seem to have you don't really, do you belong to any one religion, would you say? Or
yeah,
do
yeah.
you,
I belong to the conservative religious tradition, which is again not politically
Mhm,
conservative. It's mainline. Most conservative Jews are politically liberal. Um, there is this thing where people are obsessed, which is I always found funny. They call it cafeteria religion. But the thing is, how people learn is we take from every source that we've learned from.
mhm,
So I'm Jewish. That's my religious affiliation.
mhm.
But the fact that I've studied different things, right? That's going to influence how I see the world too. So I'm not Jewish and a Hindu and a Buddhist and a New Thought and a Scientologist. Like
But you're
that
but
might be a
you're
little much,
But you have
but
an open up mind where you don't have one
exactly,
religion, Judaism telling you that you
exactly.
can't go to all these other different things. Mark, when I was a
No,
Scientologist, and as you know,
yeah,
we're not allowed
yeah,
to, they called it having an open mind. You can't be open-minded
yes,
in Scientology, which right
yes,
there is an Orwellian
disgusting.
changing of the words. I know, but you know how
Yeah,
he justified that, Mark? Remember how he justified it? As long as
of
you're getting
course.
auditing, you can't be doing yoga and all this other shit because it'll
That's right.
harm your auditing. But that made sense. So he explains a way to entrap your mind and to give up other practices.
Mhm.
He called it other practices by having a
Yep.
very logical explanation as to why it wasn't compatible with Scientology, at least temporarily. But then
That's right.
Scientology turns out to literally be a satanic religion when you get up to OT8
Yeah.
and you find out what Hubbard's about, and then that's kept completely hidden from you. Hey, Mark, we
Well, I
have
do
to.
want to say,
Yeah, yeah, please,
just briefly, because I don't, we'll have to go
please.
right. But
Wh-
nobody learns anything in a bubble. Nobody
exactly.
comes to anything by themselves. We are influenced by our culture, by our society, by our religion, and so when people say you can't you can't be this way, or you have to look at things objectively. Like, that's a fundamentalist, absolutist viewpoint. They don't exist. Plus, it's 2023. I said this
Yeah.
before, I'll say it again. Even in science classes, people are being told that other cultures have other sciences that the West might not have. It's not, foo foo woo woo postmodernism stuff. It's just stuff that we're learning right now, because there's a lot of different influences and different things that we've missed over the past 100 years. So yeah, I'm Jewish,
Yeah.
and
Good
sometimes I
point,
like to
Mark.
meditate. Cool. Like, I'm not hurting anybody. You don't have to come to you know what I mean? So who cares?
Hmm.
That's how we learn. We learn through processes, and we learn through experience. And again, I'm speaking subjectively, but that's what it is. Because nobody knows
Listen,
shit. I'm sorry to say,
listen, Mark,
nobody
let's
knows
cut
anything.
through all the bullshit. Maryland has it right here. SPTV is my church. And this
Amen.
is where
Amen.
we preach. This has been a beautiful conversation, man. I mean, I'm not, you know, I don't do
Thanks, man.
religion. I don't feel like
Cool.
somebody mentioned
Yeah.
spirituality versus religion. Yeah, that's kind of my vibe. But
Yeah.
dude, you did open up my
Yeah.
mind. And also somebody earlier said that, you know, having an open mind isn't always good. Yeah, that's a great point that you make because
Sure, of
my mind
course.
was a little bit too open without
Yeah.
boundaries too. And that can
Yeah.
be dangerous. Where is this thing here? I'm not trying to rush you out of here, Mark. It's just
No, don't
where's the
worry about it.
comment here? The thing is, we have apostate Alex at noon, so
Yeah.
that's 10
They're
minutes
about
from
now.
now. And since
10
he was
minutes.
kind
Okay.
enough to create that intro that I fucked up on and had to start this stream again, sorry about that, guys. I am
It's
gonna
okay.
make an attempt to play that on the outing, so you'll see the other SP things that we have going on tonight. But Mark, in closing, dude, wow, what I can't wait to watch the replay
Yeah.
myself because that was a lot of information that was
Hey,
extremely
thanks.
enlightening, like I
Appreciate
would
it.
be, like I knew it would be, and like I would
Mhm.
be. What the fuck, man? Where'd that come from? Yeah, somebody said, look at the big brains on freaking Mark, right? I know, shit.
When I
SPT.
was a kid, I had a lot of severe physical and learning disabilities, and none of my teachers ever thought that I could make it to university. And I'm doing a master's
Really?
degree. So
Fucking
yeah,
A, man.
I was told basically just to quit school after 18. You're not going to make anything. You can't. I couldn't read very well. I had problems and stuff like this. So
You're
Scientology
doing
was
fucking
something that
great, man.
actually helped me a lot getting out of it, because I realized I was a much stronger person without it. So cool.
If I'm telling you, man, this guy,
Yeah.
um, I owe this guy so much, man. If I don't bail out of here in time, he's gonna kill me. But I really, really want to keep talking. Alex, can we
It's
just
okay,
have
man. We'll
one
do a
more
part
hour?
5.
Alex, could we just have a couple more hours and can we push it back? Is that cool? No, we're getting
Just
out of
maybe
here, Alex.
6,
And I'm
maybe
gonna
5, maybe 6 hours.
we're gonna finish in 2 seconds, Alex. I just want to ask Mark if he wants to say
Mhm.
anything in closing, and then I'm gonna show people that kick-ass intro at the end, and hopefully it'll work this time. You bastard! I feel like you set me up with that. Just kidding, bro.
Yeah,
I'm just messing
basically,
with you.
because I get people like who say that a lot, like, "Wow, you've experienced so many different religions. Um,
Mark's
what
like,
have you learned?" Basically, my
yeah.
thing is this: even if none of it is true, which could be a thing, right? I have been
Hmm.
able to appreciate the fact that many years ago, and even up to today, there have been a lot of very creative and very imaginative people that have put together these stories. And even if they're not true, and even if they can be abusive sometimes, appreciate the fact that human beings have always been trying to figure out why the hell we're here. And even though we
Hmm.
may not know it for sure, we may never know it, human beings are very creative, and human
Yep.
beings have a lot of talent. And so it doesn't matter to me that Eckankar has a lineage of Eckmasters that have never lived. That doesn't matter. I appreciate the creativity, and I appreciate the imagination. That, of course, can stop, and it can be bookended. And then after that, we could talk about abuses. But when it comes to people's
Right.
beliefs and like people's thoughts, I think you have to kind of appreciate the fact that regardless of people's actions, these stories are creative. And so I like the stories from my traditions, not because I think they're 100% literal or true, but I also like reading stories from other people's traditions, because you got to think about it again, going back to history. People were in a certain mind space. They were trying to figure it out, and this is what they came up with. And so they might not be literally true, but in my opinion, it's means more when it's not literal than it does when it is literal, because there's a lot more imagination and there's also a lot more to say. So that's just stuff I've learned again from comparative religious studies, current modern comparative religious studies that are taught in universities. So this is not, this is not some far philosophy or whatever. So I just say again, just look at your own tradition that you grew up in. Go read your sacred texts, and if the only thing you can do is appreciate the imagination, while, by the way, understanding that the Bible
Yes.
has a lot about slavery, racism, sexism, you can absolutely criticize those things, and it should be, but try to at least think, oh well, it was creative. I mean, yeah, I know it sounds maybe a little aloof, but that's how I think now. So it's like, just try to appreciate the creativity that brought forth these ideas, and then critique the actions afterwards. So hopefully that
That's
helps. And that's it.
actually, like we're all this in the last live stream, but give me 1 second. It's almost done.
No
Mark,
worries.
I really
Yeah, sorry.
appreciate you coming on.
I think
And
I got
audience,
yeah, I think I got my internet went out a little bit. So anyway,
oh, it's not on your
thank
end,
you
it's
guys.
on
Thank
my
you so
end.
much. Thank you guys.
I just wanted to say, if you don't mind, Mark, I really would like to have you back for a part 5, because as you
Yeah,
as you
of
guys can
course.
tell, this guy's like a brainiac.
I
What
try.
movie is that from? Look at the big brains on Brad. What is that from? That's it. I have that stuck in my head when I was listening to you talk. Mark, thanks again, man. And guys,
Sure.
here's the
Thank you guys.
outro
Thank you so much.
for the shows. Please do like, share, and subscribe if you haven't. Help the channel. We had over 50,000 subscribers before YouTube booted my ass off. If you want to know why, Apostate Alex and I did a 20-minute video on his channel that you can check out, because I don't want to re-explain it. But and go help out Alex. I guess right now, because he's going to be doing a very interesting thing called the SP Challenge, where we all send in these one sentence descriptions of a Scientologist talking to another Scientologist. One quick thing before we do an outro here. Can you give a sentence on the fly from your Scientology memory? Talk to me as if I'm a Scientologist. Can we speak our language briefly, where people wanted to be able to understand you, but I will. Come on, Mark. Give me something.
Been a little while, but it would be something like, I understood your calm and I duplicated utterly, but there was dev T on the line, and that's not okay, because when there's dev T on the line, you're Q&Aing, and when you Q&A, you're a teeny weedy, and you're 1-1, and you're not being productive, your stats are not in, and I'm going to assign you danger condition, and you better get that report in before there's any more Q&A on the lines, because I will not accept it.
Excuse
it will
you,
not be okay.
Mark. I am interbulated. You're cutting my comm, and I'm ARC broken, and you're the one that's out of ethics and need to work up from confusion because of your out 2D.
And I also read your KR, and it was put into the time machine, and that is not okay either.
Guys, let us know in the comments if you understand any of that. I would be curious to know if there's any people that can translate it that aren't Scientologists. Guys, until the next one.
But I duplicate you utterly.
I totally got that.